The Jews of Colonial Mexico. Seymour B. Liebman. February 1, 1963. Hispanic American Historical Review. The story of the Jews of Mexico is yet to be written. For the modern era there are a few reports and magazine articles, and for the colonial period there are a few biographical sketches and several narrative accounts of incidents of persecution. These do not tell the whole story. B. Lewin's Martires y Conquistadores Judíos en la América Española. One is a series of sketches of individuals, 4 of whom resided in Mexico. Examples of the efforts to relate Jews to the panorama of a larger history are Cecil Roth's History of the Marranos, 2 Hirgias y Supersticiones en la Nueva España, by Julio Jiménez Ruda, 3 History of the Inquisition in the Spanish Dependencies, by Henry C. Lee, 4 and Historia del Tribunal de la Inquisition, by José Toribio Medina. 5 There are a few others which will be mentioned later. As late as 1907 little was known about the Jews in colonial Mexico, since books such as Mexico a Través de los Siglos 6 by Riva Palacio, and Mexico Viejo 7 by Luis González Obregón, were not widely distributed or read, although the former was cited in an article in the publications of the American Jewish Historical Society. 8. The first Jews. The first Jew known to have been in Mexico was Hernando Alonso, ship's carpenter with Cortés. He arrived in 1521, and in 1528 had the unenviable distinction of being the first Jew to be burned at the stake on the North American continent. He shared this fate with Gonzalo de Morales, reputed to be his brother. There was a third Jew, so charged, at the same auto de fe, Diego de Ocana, but he was reconciled. In 1523 Charles V issued a decree that Jews, Moors, New Christians, and their descendants could not emigrate to the New World. This was not the first such decree, and it was repeated from time to time. Others were issued by the Inquisitor General of Spain. The last such decree was dated September 16, 1802.9. The very repetition of these decrees to the end of the colonial era suggests that Jews infiltrated the colonies in spite of the vigilance of the king's captains and the Inquisition's comisarios. There is more substantial evidence that numerous Jews resided in Mexico throughout the entire colonial era. Yolanda Mariel de Ibanez lists 84 cases of Jews brought before inquisitors during the period from 1528 to 1599.10. They held communal prayers, observed their religious rites in spite of all dangers, and were in communication with Jewish communities in other parts of the world. Their role during the colonial period was significant, albeit their true religious status was sub rosa. Their specific contributions to the material and spiritual development of the colonies, and their many acts of heroism, have usually been overlooked by historians. Alfonso Toro states, for example, that, in spite of the legal prohibitions, we found that many Israelites went to the New World and that they had a role in its conquest and discovery, as also in the foundation of the colonial society. Thus one finds them in all social classes and playing a role in the professions and offices. 11 It should be noted that Toro refers to them as Israelitas rather than as Marranos, Nuevos Cristianos, heretics, or other generic terms employed by others. It is impossible to write of colonial Mexico without recourse to the Inquisition documents, for they cover practically every facet of life in New Spain. The entire viceroyalty was under the jurisdiction of the Inquisition Court or Tribunal del Santo Oficio of Mexico City. It was established in 1571, but bishops had exercised inquisitorial powers before this time. In 1528 Father Vicente de Santa Maria, a Dominican, came with full authority to act in all matters of the faith. He was followed by other members of his order until the Holy Tribunal was established in 1571. The attentiveness and the diligence with which this court kept its records provides us with scrupulously detailed documentation. Screams in the torture chamber were noted in the records, as well as on which turn of the wheel the tortured shrieked forth his or her confession, and how many quarts of water were poured into the supine victim through a silk handkerchief. The records even reveal the imprecations poured forth against the Church, the Inquisitors, and even the Trinity. Indus del Ramo de Inquisition. One of the buildings on the grounds of the National Palace at the Zocalo in Mexico City is the Archivo General de la Nación. It is a 2-story structure with a basement. The ground floor has thousands of bound volumes of documents and showcases with famous documents of Mexican history. On the second floor are a reference library, thousands of volumes of documents, including those of the Inquisition, the offices of the director, Dr. J. Ignacio Rubio Main, and of his staff. The history of the AGN has been ably set forth in Dr. Rubio's study in Revista de Historia de America 1-2 and Mario Mariscal's Resina Histórica del AGN, 1550 to 1946. Point 13. These archives are the oldest in the Americas, having been founded in 1550. In the library are 15 volumes known as the Indus del Ramo de Inquisition. This is the index to the 1,552 volumes of Inquisition documents. There are 69 separately numbered volumes known as the Lote Riva Palacio. The indices to these 69 volumes are to be found in the Boletin del AGN, Tomo 4 No. 5, September Oct 1933, and Tomo 4 No. 6, November Dec 1933. The indices contain an aggregate of almost 3,300 pages, and all entries are single-spaced, without alphabetical or other organization. Some entries are brief but many are lengthy. Each entry states the year of the document, and its nature, example preciso, denunciation, information, letter, the name or names of the people involved, the nature of the charge, example heresy, witchcraft, superstition, solicitation of women by priests or monks in or out of the confessional, bigamy, being a Jew or a descendant of a Jew, following Jewish practices or observing the laws of Moses, Calvinism, Lutheranism, and the possession of prohibited books. Then follows the number of leaves of each document, and the volume in which it is to be found, the page or number of the document in the volume. Hereafter we shall use volume in referring to the documents and tomo to refer to the Indus books. The entries cover all the activities of the Inquisition such as precisos, the naming of fiscals, comisarios, expurgators, prohibited books, entries at the ports of Veracruz and Acapulco of each ship with inventories of the cargoes, accountings, pleas of all kinds, estates, sequestration of properties, genealogies, and other items. The Preciso of Jorge Alvarez is a good example of the difficulties involved in using the Indus. His name first appears in the Indus Tomo 1a page 143. The entry states that in 1594 a Preciso was brought against Anaviz, wife of Jorge Alvarez, and that the Preciso is in volume 152, number 2, and has 110 leaves, each leaf has 2 sides, and that the charge against her was Judaizanti. In the same tomo and page, the following references appear with respect to Jorge himself, a Preciso against him in 1595, charging him with Judaizanti, that the document is in volume 153, number 1, and that it consists of 194 leaves. The next entry is on page 196. His name is now followed by the word reconciled, and there is an entry that in volume 252a, hashtag 2a, 1597 AD, is a document of 8 leaves concerning the sequestration of his property. Farther down on the same page of the Indus, his name reappears, but this time it is followed by the word relapsed. The document, in volume 254a, number 10, is of 10 leaves involving the sale of his property in 1601. No further entries appear about Jorge Alvarez in the Indus. In the index to the Lote Riva Palacio, however, there is a reference to volume 18, in which is another Preciso in 1598 against him for concealing the real identity of himself and others. Without the Riva Palacio collection, no one would have known of the second Preciso. The change from reconciled to relapsed would have been inexplicable. There are numerous other cases to be found in 4 or 5 different tomos of the Indus with references to 10 or 12 different volumes. There are still some documents in the cellar of the AGN that have not been indexed or otherwise classified. Despite efforts of the present director and some of his predecessors, the AGN does not possess originals or copies of all Inquisition documents, and they could not locate all the missing documents. Some are owned by private citizens, and many are reposing in churches or other institutions both within and outside Mexico. In 1907 Enoch Honorable took 31 volumes of bound documents out of Mexico. He offered them for sale to Elkan N. Adler, an Englishman, who thereby acquired their description. Adler wrote a book, Auto de Fe and Jew, in which he has an appendix with the aforementioned description. 14 Many of these documents were only parts of Precisos, some pertain to Jews, and others reveal names not found in the AGN. Efforts to ascertain the present location of any of these documents have thus far proven fruitless. G. Conway, an Englishman, bought thousands of such documents, which became scattered after his death. Conway made paleographic transcripts and English translations of many Precisos which he donated to various institutions. Concerning these contributions, We find valuable information in the HAHR series of articles on the collections outside Mexico. Point 15. By chance this writer came across 5 original documents, each quite lengthy, at the Henry C. Lee Memorial Library at the University of Pennsylvania, and learned of the existence of 2 others at Washington State University. The librarian at the University of Pennsylvania graciously presented microfilm copies of the documents to the AGN. The Washington State University Precisos appeared in the March 1946 and March 1947 issues of the Research Studies of the State College of Washington. 6 of the aforesaid 7 documents pertain to Jews, and 2 of them supply significant missing links in this writer's research. There have been further incidents in the quest for documents which prove that much remains to be done to complete the Mexican archives. One institution in the United States has a substantial number of Mexican Inquisition documents, but it has refused to honor requests of other institutions and individuals for photostatic or other copies. Information and observations gleaned from the Indus. Failure to dig deeply into the primary sources has obscured the fact that the Jews constituted a substantial proportion of the white population in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. This writer's name index reveals that over 1,100 Jews were brought before the Mexican tribunal during its reign. A cursory search among documents and sources other than those in the AGN has revealed another 200 names prior to 1795. A few members of prominent Mexican Christian families have not hesitated to reveal that they have Jewish ancestry. Their lineage dates back 2 or 3 centuries in Mexico. Excluded are the over-glamorized and publicized Indian Jews. Doubt of their ancestry prior to 1870 is entertained by the few who have sought out the facts of their history. It is a reasonable estimate that during the middle of the 17th century between 2,000 and 3,000 Jews were living in New Spain. This is a considerable part of the total white population which, excluding the clerical hierarchy, is estimated at 20,000. The Indus reveals that many Jews, as well as others, died before the termination of their trials. Some died from torture and others from causes brought on by the unsanitary conditions in the Inquisition cells. Most were spared capital punishment in any form. Confiscation of property was inevitable. Men received as many as 300 lashes, and some were consigned to the galleys for years, some were imprisoned for a few years, and practically all had to wear sanbenitos for varying periods. Women were often sentenced to serve in convents, sometimes for life, and a few received lashes which were applied in the public streets with the criminal, regardless of sex, stripped to the waist. Approximately 200 Jews died directly or indirectly through the Inquisition in Mexico. The Inquisition itself never decreed capital punishment. The criminal was turned over to the secular arm to pronounce and carry out the final punishment. In this manner, the Church was spared from having blood on its hands. However, the clergy and monks officiated at autos de fe. An example of the understated figure of those who died as a result of the Inquisition is that of Henry B. Parks, who, in his History of Mexico 16 states that less than 50 persons seem to have been burned by the Inquisition during more than 200 years. An illustration of why more died is the case of Francisco Home alias Vicente Enriquez. In 1641 he under torment admitted that he and 14 others named in the Indus were Jews. He was crippled as a result of the torture and died in jail. The foregoing is the literal translation of Tomo 4 page 26 of the Indus. Juan Mendez Isparin was another who died in jail in 1614. Others suffered the same fate. Other mistakes have been made by historians. The redoubtable Riva Palacio confused Luis de Carvajal, a conquistador and governor, with Luis de Carvajal, El Mozo, the younger, and nephew of the governor. José de Ribio Medina's excellent work also contains numerous errors. These have been indicated by Pablo Martínez del Río in his Alumbrada 17 and in La Inquisición en México durante el siglo XVI, by Yolanda Muriel de Ibanez 18 and in other works. Many of Medina's errors were corrected in the 1952 edition of his work by Julio Jiménez Ruda. The addition of the great number of names by Jiménez Ruda shows how much had been disclosed by new finds in 50 years. Some historians imply that the existence of Jews in Mexico terminated with the general auto de fe in 1649 that rivaled anything held in Spain for the number involved and the elaborate theatrical setting. The Indus and other competent sources, however, indicate that there were 300 cases involving Jews before the tribunal between 1649 and 1795. In 1663 it was presumed that the town of Mixteco was so overrun with Portuguese Jews that the Inquisition ordered that the Edict of Faith be read in the churches there. 19. Subsequent to 1649 most of the processos against Jews were those in the public eye, such as members of the clergy. Several Jews were monks, one was chief constable of the Santo Officio, others served as secretaries to church dignitaries and office holders. The fact that in the later days of the Inquisition there were not many processos against Jews does not prove that none were present. In Mexico Viejo, Luis González Obregón states, p. 718, as in earlier times, the Jews Judaizantes, Lutherans, Calvinists, witches, heretics, bigamists, etc., etc., had occupied there the Inquisition's attention. They were now completely absorbed with the contamination of ideas of the past century, the progressionists, patriots, and lovers of independence. The following are some samples of Jews against whom proceedings were brought in later times. A group of soldiers in 1671, Captain Diego González Figueredo, 1693, Father José de San Ignacio, alias Juan Fernández de León, 1712, who was the subject of two processos and was a Jewish dogmatizer, see glossary. Several Gachapines, an Irish Jew, Juan Guillermo, 1714, an army scout same year, Antonio Calvo Diaz, pharmacist, 1731, Don José de Villorati, alias Diego Rodriguez Garcia, meat supplier for Tlaxcala, 1733, the mayor of Zacuelapa from 1765 to 1782, José Solomon, a doctor, in 1768, the attorney for the royal court in 1729, Don José de Cardenas, mayor of Tecali, 1735, a Franciscan monk Rafael Gil Rodriguez, 1788, and the mayor of Panuco and Tampico in 1783. The difficulties in the use of the Indus thus lie primarily in its lack of organization. Remarks interpolated in the entries prevent rapid study.